It all began as a carefully planned cruelty. Charlotte, the wife of a millionaire, decided to turn her maid Naomi into the punchline of a joke before the elite. A dinner invitation designed as a trap, expecting the young woman to be humiliated in public. But what no one imagined was that this very invitation would become the doorway to a powerful transformation, one that would change not only Naomi's life, but also the lives of everyone around her. And this is the unexpected twist you're about to witness. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single detail of this story full of revelations. And don't forget, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. I want to see how far Naomi's story will echo across the world. High society loves a stage, and Charlotte knew exactly how to use hers. Surrounded by crystal glasses and flattering friends, she always found pleasure in making cruel jokes about Naomi, the maid who cleaned her house. It was as if she needed this spectacle to reaffirm her own worth, forcing laughter from those who orbited around her. Naomi, on the other hand, was the opposite, reserved, kind, carrying a calmness that unsettled those who lived for appearances. She endured the insults in silence, but not out of cowardice, and it was strategy. Her serenity created an uncomfortable contrast for anyone trying to destabilize her, as if silence were sharper than any reply. Charlotte laughed loudly, with that air of superiority only those who depend on others' approval seem to carry. Her friends, of course, joined in, as if their laughter could erase the emptiness they felt inside. This scene repeated itself like a ritual, almost like a ceremony of vanity, where Naomi's dignity was always the sacrifice. Naomi, though enduring, felt the weight of those words in her heart. It is never easy to be mocked when you are simply doing your duty. It was like being judged by a uniform, as if her essence could be reduced to the role of a maid. Yet inside she held a certainty. Those labels could never define who she truly was. The greatest battles many times are not fought in grand confrontations, but in small, everyday scenes. Charlotte believed she was just having fun, but in truth she was planting the seeds of something much bigger. Every attempt to dim someone else's light inevitably ends up making that very person shine brighter. While Charlotte bragged about expensive handbags or sophisticated dinners, she forgot that luxury is not the same as greatness. True greatness is measured by the impact we leave on others, by the respect we inspire. Naomi, even without seeking attention, radiated exactly that silent strength. At every gathering, the cruel jokes worked like hidden tests. Naomi, even without realizing it, was strengthening an invisible muscle of resilience. Each hostile word left scars, but also built layers of firmness that one day would reveal themselves before everyone. Charlotte, dependent on applause, seemed like an actress who only felt alive when her audience responded. Naomi, by contrast, needed no stage. Her strength came from within, from the story she carried and the dignity she never abandoned. That difference, silent yet evident, set them apart more than any social abyss ever could. In that cruel circle, it seemed the game was already defined. Charlotte shining at the center, Naomi quietly standing on the margins. But spotlights have a will of their own, and sooner or later they turn toward the least expected. Charlotte did not yet know it, but her loud laughter was only the introduction to a performance about to change course entirely. Charlotte, always looking for new ways to feel superior, had an idea that made her friends nearly fall out of their chairs with laughter. Between sips of champagne and malicious remarks, she suggested inviting Naomi to the next business dinner, an event reserved only for entrepreneurs and socialites. The proposal wasn't a gesture of kindness, but rather a carefully laid trap. The elite around her cheered at the malice of the plan, already imagining the maid sitting among tycoons, out of place, target of stares and whispers. For them, the public humiliation would be the height of entertainment. It was like turning a business meeting into a cruel show, with Naomi as the main attraction. Unaware of the ambush, Charlotte, with her calculated smile, described in detail what she expected to happen. Looks of disdain, muffled giggles, cutting remarks. Her voice carried the eagerness of someone planning a precise strike. Her friends, accomplices in cruelty, applauded the idea as if it were a masterpiece of malice. For Charlotte, the invitation was a double-edged weapon. If Naomi refused, it would confirm her inferior place. If she accepted, she would walk straight onto the stage where everyone would laugh at her. It was a no-win game, crafted by someone who thrived on the insecurities of others. The plan seemed too perfect to fail. What Charlotte didn't realize was the audacity of what she was proposing. Exposing someone to ridicule in a business environment carried risks far beyond the pleasure of mockery. What to her seemed like entertainment could easily turn into collective embarrassment. But blinded by ego, she ignored those subtleties. Her friends, enthralled, questioned nothing. They only wanted front-row seats to the spectacle, each one imagining the scene with almost childish delight. It was a reflection of how entire groups can feed off the malice of a single person, reinforcing each other in their cruelty. In that hall, the laughter echoed like a silent pact, a pact that didn't need signatures but made it clear they were all committed to turning Naomi into a target. Charlotte, the conductor of this cruel orchestra, led the notes with precision while the others tuned their instruments of sarcasm. Meanwhile, the invitation rested on the table, still only a verbal idea but already carrying the weight of a destined outcome. A single sheet of embossed paper or an official message would be enough to turn the joke into reality. The simple act of writing Naomi's name on a list would change everything. Charlotte smiled once more, toasting with her accomplices. To her, she was about to stage the greatest moment of her social life, the downfall of someone who dared to exist silently within her circle. What she didn't know was that by delivering this invitation, she would also open the door to a much bigger game, one that would slip out of her control. When Naomi received the unexpected invitation, her hands almost trembled. It wasn't common to see her name printed on paper adorned with golden letters and luxury crests. She immediately understood what it meant. This wasn't honor, it was a trap. Charlotte didn't open doors. She set snares wrapped in silk. Even so, Naomi kept the envelope carefully as if it were something precious. In the silence of her modest home, the shiny paper rested on a simple wooden table. There, far from the laughter of the elite, Naomi could think without haste. The trap was clear, yet something in her heart whispered that perhaps this was the right moment to turn the game around. It wasn't about Charlotte. It was about proving to herself who she really was. Every glance at the invitation made Naomi picture the dinner scene. She knew the stares, the giggles, the whispers would follow her like shadows. But instead of shrinking back, she began to imagine facing it all with her head held high. It was like walking into a storm, not to run from it, but to show she could cross it. Naomi wasn't naive. She recognized the risk. But her life had always followed the same pattern. Whenever someone tried to belittle her, she found strength in unexpected places. She remembered sleepless nights caring for her sick mother, the heavy work that never erased her dignity, and now, before that invitation, she saw another chapter waiting to be written with courage. The invitation, once a symbol of humiliation, began to transform into a symbol of opportunity. It wasn't merely about attending. It was about showing the world that no one could trap her within a label. For Naomi, the choice was no longer about going or not going. It was about remaining invisible or allowing herself to be seen. That night, before bed, Naomi placed the invitation on her nightstand. She stared at the ceiling and breathed deeply as though sealing a silent decision. Inside her, a flame grew. She wouldn't go to defend herself, but to show that her essence could not bow to judgment. She was ready to walk among wolves without losing her light. While many saw the invitation only as a snare, Naomi was already sketching another destiny. Her thoughts turned to preparation, not for Charlotte's spectacle, but for her own affirmation. It was as if the stage of humiliation could suddenly become the stage of revelation. The contrast between the simplicity of her life and the artificial glitter of the elite didn't intimidate her. On the contrary, it was that very contrast that gave her strength. She knew she didn't need jewels to shine, nor expensive dresses to appear imposing. It was enough to be present, body and soul, carrying the posture of someone who had never lost respect for herself. And so Naomi closed her eyes with a faint smile. Charlotte believed she had set bait for a spectacle of humiliation, but little did she know she was lighting the spotlights for something far greater. The choice was made, and the next step would be to turn silence into presence and presence into power. Naomi was not alone in her decision. When she discreetly shared the invitation with her neighbors, she found support where she least expected it. The seamstress on her street, a woman with quick hands and an experienced gaze, offered to create a dress worthy of any luxurious ballroom. The simple fabric, transformed by skilled needles, took shape as if it also carried the collective strength of those who believed in her. Her longtime friend, the hairdresser, arrived smiling with her tools, determined to highlight what Naomi had most striking: her natural beauty. Every strand of her black power was cared for with devotion, shaped to convey presence and authority. Naomi looked into the mirror and began to see not just the maid of a mansion, but the woman who had always lived hidden beneath the weight of routine. The neighbors, each in their own way, contributed. Some brought small accessories, others offered words of encouragement, and even children watched in awe, as if witnessing the preparation of a queen about to claim her throne. The collective gesture went beyond appearance. It was an entire community reminding Naomi that she represented much more than a social stigma. In the process, Naomi discovered something profound. It wasn't just an external transformation, but an inner awakening. The dress, the hairstyle, the touches of care worked as symbols, but the true change was in her posture. Each detail reinforced a conviction. No matter where she came from, she had the right to belong anywhere. The mirror reflected not only her image, but the strength that had always been there. Her eyes shone with intensity, as if every past humiliation had turned into fuel for that moment. It was impossible not to notice that behind her discreet smile lay an unshakable decision: no longer live on the margins, but at the center. The hands that once carried buckets and cloths now touched fine fabrics, not as a sign of vanity, but as an expression of power. The feeling was different, like Naomi was reclaiming something that had always belonged to her but had been buried under the urgency of survival. The dress didn't make her someone else. It simply revealed to everyone who she already was. As she tried each detail, Naomi realized she no longer had to fear the stares that would come. If before they were looks of disdain, now they would inevitably be looks of recognition. For nothing is more magnetic than someone who presents themselves to the world with truth, and Naomi was ready for that. The preparations became a ritual. Laughter, soft music in the background, voices surrounding her with affection. Naomi wasn't just getting dressed for a dinner. She was preparing to turn a page in her life. Each passing minute brought her closer to the moment she would walk into the hall, not as the punchline, but as the protagonist. When she looked in the mirror one last time, she took a deep breath and smiled. Reflected, there was no longer the maid humiliated in silence, but the woman she had always carried inside. Strong, elegant, powerful. A queen was ready to emerge, and the spotlights, though unaware, were already waiting to shine upon her. The night of the grand dinner had arrived. The mansion shone like a palace, filled with high society guests, all dressed in flawless attire, every detail carefully calculated to impress. Animated conversations blended with the clinking of crystal glasses and the soft sound of the orchestra. It was the perfect stage to display power, and Charlotte believed it would also be the scene of Naomi's humiliation. When the doors opened, an unexpected silence spread through the hall. Naomi appeared at the entrance, walking with firm steps and a serene gaze. Her dress, simple yet perfectly tailored, highlighted her athletic and elegant figure, while her voluminous black power framed her presence like a natural crown. She didn't look like an intruder. She looked like the true owner of the space. Eyes that had been distracted were now hypnotized. Magnates, socialites, and businessmen turned their heads in unison, as if something impossible had just happened. There was no laughter, no whispers, only the stunned impact of a woman who turned every step into a declaration. Charlotte, from afar, forced a nervous smile. Her plan was crumbling before her very eyes. She had prepared the stage for ridicule, but Naomi had transformed the entrance into a spectacle of magnificence. Each of Naomi's steps struck like an invisible blow against the mask of arrogance Charlotte had so carefully built. Naomi walked without hurry, as though time itself had slowed to allow everyone to behold her. The sound of her heels echoed against the marble floor, marking the rhythm of a story being rewritten before the entire elite. This was not just an entrance. It was the silent coronation of someone finally allowing herself to be seen. The room's reaction was undeniable. Men halted their conversations to follow her with their eyes. Women exchanged uneasy glances, and even the waiters paused briefly, captivated by the unseen power radiating from her. No luxury could compete with the authenticity Naomi exuded. What had once been a trap had become a showcase. With every gaze she received, Naomi didn't shrink. On the contrary, she held her back straight, her chin slightly lifted, radiating natural confidence. In that hall of gold and crystal, her presence was the only element that felt truly precious. The contrast was striking. Charlotte, draped in designer dresses and dazzling jewels, seemed dimmed by the powerful simplicity of Naomi. There were no excesses in Naomi's appearance, only a certainty. No one in that room could ignore her, and so Naomi crossed the hall to the center, while every eye followed her with absolute attention. The dinner, once destined to be just another gathering of business and vanity, had become a milestone. The stares, the whispers, and the reverent silence all announced that something greater was about to unfold. Among the admiring gazes of that night, there was one that never wavered. Alexander Hayes, a renowned tycoon, a 45-year-old man, tall, imposing, with neatly trimmed gray hair and a tailored suit. He observed Naomi with the calmness of someone who knows how to see beyond appearances. His attention wasn't that of a man easily impressed, but of someone who recognized greatness when he saw it. Alexander was used to being surrounded by artificial socialites and businessmen desperate for status. But when he saw Naomi crossing the hall, something different stirred within him. It wasn't just her evident beauty, but the way she walked with naturalness and dignity. It was as if every gesture of hers communicated a truth no one else in that room dared to express. Naomi, without realizing it, had captured the gaze of the most influential man in the hall. While others whispered or exchanged astonished looks, Alexander remained silent, studying every detail. He wasn't looking for extravagance, he sought essence. And in Naomi he found precisely what seemed lost among the elite: authenticity. He rose slowly, unhurried, but with the firmness of someone who is accustomed to being noticed. His movement did not go unnoticed. Murmurs stopped for an instant, as if everyone sensed something unusual was about to happen. It was rare to see Alexander showing public interest, especially for someone outside his usual circle. As he approached, his magnetic presence seemed to part the space around him. Conversations ceased as he walked, and curious eyes followed the encounter. Charlotte, from a distance, felt her heart race. What had been a mere joke was beginning to take a dangerous turn, slipping from her control. Alexander stopped before Naomi, leaning slightly in a gesture of respect. His intense eyes met hers, and in that moment, there was no difference of status or social position. Only two presences recognizing one another. He gave a discreet smile, a sign of enchantment but also of admiration. Naomi held her composure, unshaken. Her simplicity contrasted with the weight of a man who could move fortunes, yet she gave no space to insecurity. On the contrary, she returned Alexander's gaze with serenity. It was as if in that brief silence an entire conversation took place between them. The hall looked on, stunned. Some expected a scene of embarrassment, but instead what unfolded was an unexpected exchange of respect. Alexander seemed captivated not only by Naomi, but by what she represented. The proof that integrity could outshine any jewel. His fascination was becoming evident to everyone. And so, before the watchful eyes of the elite, Alexander took the initiative to begin a dialogue, stepping closer. It was not mere courtesy, but a symbolic gesture. The most powerful man in the hall had chosen to dedicate his attention to Naomi. And that first exchange would be only the beginning of something far greater. Charlotte could no longer bear the attention Naomi had stolen. Her once confident face now trembled with nervousness. In a sudden outburst of silent fury, she decided to raise her voice in the middle of the hall. Her words cut through the air like a blade. "Do you know who she is? She's the maid in my house." The murmur that followed was heavy with surprise and discomfort. The hall froze. Guests who had only been watching now stared in shock. Charlotte's words didn't sound like a revelation, but like an accusation. It was clear she intended to strip Naomi of the dignity that radiated so strongly that night. Yet instead of laughter, the room was filled with collective unease. Naomi remained silent. Her upright posture and steady gaze disarmed any attempt at humiliation. It was as if Charlotte's words had lost their strength, crashing against Naomi's serenity. The silence of the protagonist spoke louder than any retort could. Then Alexander Hayes rose in all his authority. With eyes fixed on Charlotte, he broke the silence of the hall with only a few words, each one weighted with meaning. "Titles don't impress me. Integrity does." The impact was immediate. Conversations ceased entirely, and every eye turned to him. Charlotte tried to hold his gaze, but she couldn't. Alexander's response rang like a verdict. There was no room for rebuttals or excuses. With a single sentence, he dismantled years of arrogance she had so carefully cultivated. The elite, who once applauded her venom, now looked away, embarrassed. Naomi, still silent, radiated more greatness than any crown could provide. Her calm expression revealed she didn't need to defend herself. Alexander had turned the trap into a pedestal. In front of everyone, her essence had been recognized and validated beyond dispute. The guests whispered discreetly, but not with mockery. Their murmurs carried respect and even admiration. Some wondered silently how they had overlooked this woman for so long. Others no longer saw her as Charlotte's maid, but as a figure embodying integrity amid the social theater. Charlotte, diminished, felt the sting of public defeat. Her attempt at humiliation had not only failed, but had placed her at the center of a scene that exposed her own smallness. Her power to orchestrate laughter had turned into suffocating silence. This time the blow was against her. Meanwhile, Naomi remained unshaken, as if she knew that time and truth always revealed each person's true role. The hall, now wrapped in respectful silence, seemed to await the next move. And Alexander, standing beside her, made it clear the night was far from over. The hall still lingered in silence after Alexander's response. Everyone expected the evening to continue, but the tycoon didn't stop at a striking phrase. He rose fully, his presence dominating the room, and turned to the hosts. His deep voice echoed through the hall with the firmness of someone delivering not just an opinion, but a veiled command. "I want Naomi present at the next business dinner." The words did not sound like an invitation, but like a condition. The impact rippled through the hall like invisible waves. Businessmen exchanged glances, understanding the weight of his demand. In that moment, Naomi ceased to be merely an unusual guest. She became a central figure in the machinery of power. Edward Miller, Charlotte's husband, felt cold sweat running down his neck. He knew Alexander was essential to keeping his million-dollar contracts alive. He couldn't afford to oppose him. The desperate look he cast at Charlotte revealed the abyss opening beneath his feet. The family's fortune now depended on the woman his wife had tried to ridicule. Charlotte, in turn, lost her breath. She was used to dictating rules and turning people into the butt of jokes. Now, before everyone, she realized her influence meant nothing against Alexander's word. Her forced smile barely concealed the rage burning inside her. For the first time, her superiority looked like a fragile mask exposed to the crowd. Naomi listened to the demand in silence, her expression balanced. She never sought this kind of power, but she understood that something much larger was unfolding. It was as if the universe had used Charlotte's arrogance to reposition her in a place of honor. And Naomi knew she had to face this new turn with serenity. The guests, still in shock, whispered discreetly. Some saw the scene as a social scandal, others as a spectacle of poetic justice. But they all agreed on one thing. Naomi had become the most talked about figure of the night. Not through humiliation, but through the unexpected weight of her presence. Alexander remained steady, his eyes scanning the room. His gaze left no doubt. Anyone who wanted to continue doing business with him would have to accept Naomi at the table. This condition shifted not only the social dynamic, but also the invisible hierarchy that sustained that circle of power. Charlotte, feeling the weight of defeat pile up, forced herself to breathe deeply to keep her composure. She knew she couldn't confront Alexander in public. The only path was to swallow her pride and accept Naomi's presence. Yet the thought of her former maid being elevated to prestige burned like venom in her throat. Naomi, calm and composed, understood her life would never return to what it had been. That demand changed everything. What had begun as a trap of humiliation had turned into a bridge toward an unexpected destiny, and everyone knew. The night was far from over, and the next gatherings would be even more revealing. Charlotte spent days in torment. The image of Alexander defending Naomi would not leave her mind. The pride that once sustained her every step now crushed her, reminding her of her public defeat. It was as if all the masks she had worn for years had shattered before society. For the first time, she was not in control of the narrative. Edward, pressured by business, made no effort to hide his frustration. He knew that without fulfilling Alexander's demand, vital contracts would slip away like sand through his fingers. And so Charlotte, who had always dictated the rules and belittled others, found herself in an unprecedented position, dependent on the very woman she most despised. Day after day, Charlotte rehearsed in front of the mirror the request she needed to make. Simple words became heavy as they left her lips. How could she beg the woman she had mocked so many times? Her vanity raged against it, but reality was merciless. Without Naomi, her world would collapse. When she finally gathered the courage, she went to Naomi's house. She knocked on the door with trembling hands and a racing heart. She wore no jewels, and none of her friends accompanied her. This time she was only a worn-out woman, stripped of the adornments she had always used as armor. The scene itself was already a reversal of roles. Naomi opened the door and found Charlotte changed. There was no arrogance in her eyes, only a deep weariness and wounded pride. For an instant, the silence between them was so heavy it seemed to shout louder than words. Naomi simply waited, steady, allowing the visitor to drown in her own hesitation. With a trembling voice, Charlotte asked Naomi to attend the next dinner. There was no irony, no superiority, only a fragile plea held up by necessity. It was like watching a queen stripped of her throne, trying to regain what she no longer had the power to control. Naomi, calm and composed, listened without interruption. Her eyes conveyed serenity but also authority. When she accepted, she made it clear it was not for Charlotte's sake but for her own. It would not be an act of submission, but a conscious choice to claim the space she deserved. Charlotte felt the difference immediately. She was no longer the mistress looking down on her maid. She was someone indebted, asking help from a woman she had underestimated. The reversal of power was complete, and Naomi didn't need to raise her voice to assert her position. At that moment, the elite had no idea, but Naomi's second arrival promised to be even more breathtaking. And Charlotte, though broken inside, carried the burden of knowing she now had to pave the way for the very woman she had tried to destroy. The night of the second dinner arrived with even greater anticipation. Guests whispered among themselves, eager to see if Naomi would return and how she would be received. The hall, glowing with lights and decorated with even more grandeur, seemed to await not only business but a spectacle. There was a sense in the air that something historic was about to happen. When Naomi entered, there was no silence, there was reverence. She was more dazzling than before, wearing a dress that highlighted both her strength and grace, with her black power even more striking, like a crown declaring authority. Her discreet smile radiated confidence and serenity. The entire hall bowed to her, not physically, but with undivided attention. The gazes repeated themselves. Businessmen halted negotiations. Socialites forgot their trivial chatter, and even the orchestra seemed to play more softly, as if her presence had reshaped the atmosphere. It was clear that Naomi was no longer just a guest. She was the centerpiece of the dinner. Charlotte and her friends were present, but their expressions no longer carried arrogance. There was discomfort, resentment, and above all, helplessness. The game had turned so completely that the laughter that once united them had turned into heavy silence. Charlotte tried to hide it, but her tense eyes betrayed the weight she carried. Naomi, on the other hand, had nothing to prove. She walked with steady steps, greeting a few guests with a slight nod. Her simplicity was her greatest weapon. While everyone expected a performance, she was simply herself. And that authenticity conquered more than any display of luxury ever could. Alexander Hayes watched from a distance, taking in every detail. The tycoon knew how to recognize greatness, and in Naomi he saw not only a woman who had endured humiliation, but someone who had been born to shine in any space. His steady gaze revealed growing admiration, and the entire hall noticed the silent connection between them. Edward Miller, cornered, struggled to maintain his composure in front of his business partners. He knew that at that moment his position depended entirely on Naomi's presence. Every forced smile he gave was a painful reminder that his fortune was tied to the very woman his wife had underestimated. The contrast could not have been sharper. Naomi, of humble origins, now radiated confidence and elegance, while Charlotte and her friends sank into unease. It was as if the entire hall had begun to revolve around her, a new center of gravity, and no one dared to challenge that invisible power. The evening was still young, but it was already clear that Naomi had not only earned respect, she had become indispensable. Every gaze in her direction foretold that something greater was on its way, and the dinner, once again, would stop being about business and become the stage for a revelation. The dinner went on, but Naomi's presence remained the focus of all attention. Side conversations dimmed in intensity whenever she smiled or exchanged words with a guest. It was as if the entire atmosphere was guided by her silent energy. And then Alexander, who until that moment had observed from a distance, decided to approach. He walked with steady steps, each one echoing on the marble floor like an inevitable announcement. Eyes turned instantly toward the tycoon, and once again, silence swept through the hall. When he stopped before Naomi, there was not only admiration in his gaze, but also determination. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for without even realizing it. Alexander extended his hand and held Naomi's, a simple gesture, but loaded with symbolism. The guests held their breath. His voice carried a mixture of solemnity and sincerity when he said, "I need to be honest. I don't care if you're a maid or a queen, but there's one issue." Suspense hung in the air. Naomi, intrigued, tilted her head slightly, meeting his gaze with serenity. Her question echoed softly yet firmly. "What issue?" The guests leaned in discreetly, eager to hear every word as if they were accomplices to a secret about to be revealed. Alexander smiled. Not a smile to impress, but one that revealed the truth of his feelings. His answer was clear, simple, and overwhelming. "I don't want you cleaning another mansion, because I want you to be my fiancée." The impact was immediate, and a hushed murmur rippled through the hall. Charlotte nearly dropped her glass. Her face paled, and her friends exchanged glances of utter shock. This was not part of any script they could have imagined. The scene she had planned to humiliate Naomi had turned into the greatest blow against her own vanity. Naomi, still holding Alexander's hand, took a deep breath. Her eyes, those that had endured so many humiliations, now sparkled with emotion and surprise. It was not merely a marriage proposal. It was the crowning of her dignity in front of everyone, and even in shock, she remained composed as always. The guests didn't know how to react. Some applauded discreetly, others simply smiled, acknowledging the greatness of the moment. It was as if the entire hall had become witness to a chapter of justice and love that broke through every social convention. The proposal still lingered in the air, and everyone awaited Naomi's response. But what was to come would not only be a personal choice, it would be a milestone capable of redefining not only her life, but also the way everyone in that circle viewed power, love, and truth. The entire hall froze after Alexander's proposal. The air felt heavier, as if even the sound of cutlery had gone silent to hear Naomi's response. The socialites, so used to commanding the scene, now stared wide-eyed, unable to react. It was a moment that escaped any script of high society. Charlotte, overwhelmed with despair, tried to intervene. Her trembling voice echoed through the hall, desperate to reclaim some fragment of control. "Do you know who she is?" But before she could continue, Alexander silenced her with a steady gaze. His deep voice rang out like a verdict. "Some people spend their lives pretending to be important. Naomi doesn't need to pretend, she simply is." The words struck like a sentence. Charlotte's friends, who had always laughed at her cruel jokes, lowered their eyes in shame. The silence of the elite spoke louder than any applause. It was as if the mask of an entire society had been ripped away in that instant. Naomi, still holding Alexander's hand, took a deep breath. This was not merely a proposal. It was a public affirmation that her dignity could no longer be questioned. Her gaze sparkled, not because of jewels she didn't wear, but from the recognition of her essence. Alexander, unwavering, never looked away. The tycoon whom many feared now stood vulnerable before them all, showing that true power did not lie in contracts or fortunes, but in choosing truth, even when it defied convention. His gesture was more than romantic. It was revolutionary. Charlotte recoiled, feeling the weight of defeat corroding her every fiber. The glass in her trembling hand mirrored her internal collapse. No words could rescue her from that moment. Her downfall was inevitable. The audience, restrained until then, began to react. Timid applause rose from a few corners, gradually spreading. It was not a thunderous applause, but one heavy with respect. The sound echoed like a collective acknowledgement of Naomi's greatness and Alexander's courage. Then Naomi smiled, letting serenity flood the hall. She leaned gently toward Alexander and kissed him before everyone. The simple yet profound gesture transformed the setting into witness of a new beginning. It was more than romance, it was truth triumphing over pretense. As the hall erupted in contained reactions, it became clear that the night was far from ending. It was only the beginning of a new story, one that would change not only the lives of Naomi and Alexander, but also how everyone there understood the true essence of power and love. And so, before everyone's eyes, Naomi and Alexander sealed with a kiss what no one could ever have imagined. The woman who was once the target of laughter and cruelty became the most respected figure in the hall, while Charlotte, who always believed she controlled the scene, was reduced to silence. The night ended not merely as a dinner, but as a turning point, a moment of no return for all involved. But the question remains, is the story truly over here? Alexander may have declared his love, but we know the elite do not forget so easily. Charlotte swallowed her public humiliation, but will she accept defeat without a fight? And Edward, whose fortune depends on this alliance, how far will he go to protect his business? Naomi won the respect, the love, and the place that had long been denied her. But every victory carries new challenges. What comes after that kiss? Will it be the beginning of a reign of love, or merely the opening of an even greater battle? If you want to uncover how this story continues, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss a single detail of the next chapter. And tell me in the comments, do you want part 2 of this story? Naomi and Alexander's lives still hold many surprises, and perhaps the best is only just beginning.